So you've got yourself a little problem. You've got all these games to choose from, but you can only play one game at a time. So what do? Well, you stand there paralyzed by the amount of possibilities for a while until you reach the only logical conclusion, which is that you don't need to play any of these games, and instead you should get online and shop for more games to add to your collection. Choosing which game to play used to be so much simpler when we were younger. Because we didn't have as many games, we just played what we had. It was very simple. Once you got a new game, probably weren't going to be getting another one for maybe 6 months, maybe an entire year, who knows. So when you got that game, you were playing it. It was time to sit down, hunker in, and get comfortable because that was going to be pretty much the only game you had for a while. However, now as adults, most of us have far more games to choose from and far less time to play them. Where's the logic in that? So when you do get a chance to play a game, that is precious, valuable free time. And the pressure is on to choose something to play where you're like, oh, can't waste this time. Gotta choose something to play? I don't know. Well, here's a logical suggestion for which game you should play next. How about the last game you were playing? And to that, some of you might be thinking, I'm not some sucker bound to only one game. I got all sorts of games. I could be playing something different every time. Not always the best idea. Here's the thing, to get the most out of a game, you gotta hammer that game, play it a lot. You can't just fart around with the game for a little bit and then move on to something else. And to that, some of you may be thinking, now hold on just a minute there, Sparky. Aren't you the one always saying that one of the best things about retro video games is that you can just quickly pick them up, play them for a little bit, have a great time, and be done with it? Yes, that is true, but when I say a little bit of time, I still mean more than 5 minutes. You've got to put at least some time into a game in order to enjoy it. And of course, what type of game you're playing will also determine roughly how long you need to play it in order to enjoy it. But even in those cases, generally being able to play that game for just a bit longer will increase your enjoyment of the game, making it worth sticking with the game. For example, let's just take a game, I don't know, off the top of my head, Rocket Knight Adventures. So I could play this game for 5 minutes and have a good time. Sure, heck, I could probably just boot up the intro sequence and have a good time. But if I play it for half an hour, now we're talking. And if I play it for, say, up to 2 hours, whew, we're talking about a classic Saturday at that point. Now, what about games that take multiple hours to beat? Well, when you choose to play one of those games, it's almost like making a commitment, because ideally when you decide to play that game, you're thinking, I want to play this game all the way through and beat it. You're not planning to give up on the game halfway through and then come back to it years later or possibly never. My first tip when it comes to playing those types of games is to not play too many of them at the same time, especially if they're story heavy or maybe you need to know where you're going in it at all and something like that, and you need to keep your brain kind of fresh for that game and not have too many things muddling up your thoughts where you're like, wait a second, what am I doing here? I can't, and you get the games confused. For example, if you're playing like Outrun and Zelda at the same time, you're probably going to be fine. It's not like you're going to be like, oh, wait, Ganon? Who the heck is this? I thought I was fighting against an evil red Ferrari. Oh, wait, I'm thinking about Outrun. Silly me. Actually, you want to talk about video game villains, the stupid semi-trucks in Outrun that change lanes right in front of you? Now there's a video game villain. All right, now I'm going to talk about a concept that a lot of us really struggle with, and that's having a very strict play a game until you beat it policy. This is tough because you're getting distracted by games constantly. You got to have that commitment to that one game to see it all the way through. And when it comes to seeing games all the way through, there is nobody who does it better that I know of than Jake. That's right, good old Jake. Now, Jake is a longtime, and I mean longtime viewer of the channel. And what he does, I talked to him, what he does, I can't believe it. He sees a game through almost no matter what. Even if it's a really difficult game like Ghosts and Goblins, he will play that sucker until he beats it. It's admirable is what it is. So, it's like I always say, when it comes to beating games, it would be a mistake to not do it like magic. And of course, a very nice side effect of having a strict play it until you beat it policy is that it makes choosing what game to play very simple in a lot of ways, because once you start playing that game, then the answer to which game should I play is just going to be that same answer every time you make a decision on what to play until you've beaten that game. Now, sure, you may mix in some other games, but for the most part, it's going to add some clarity, some direction for what you should be playing. A big keyword that could help you out when it comes to choosing which game to play is focus. For example, some people will focus on one particular console for maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month, maybe multiple months. And this is a great idea because anything you can do to make it so you're not choosing from every single game you own for all your consoles is going to be helpful. So if you just have that one console, it narrows things down and just makes it a lot easier. Another thing that you could do is focus on one particular series. Let's say Castlevania. So for a few weeks, you play nothing but Castlevania games. So every time you go to play a game, you're like, do I want to play this Castlevania game or maybe another one? And the transition to swap between those games might be easier because Castlevania games are similar enough to each other that it's going to feel familiar and you're going to be right at home when you start playing each game. The last point that I want to get into is a big one, which is wanting to play the games that you just got. A very natural curiosity, of course. You just got it and you want to see what it's all about. Every time a new game gets added to your collection, it just makes the rest of your collection seem like such old news, which is kind of ironic because if we're collecting retro video games, then technically it's all old news. But perhaps the even bigger issue is that if you constantly have games being added into your collection, it makes it hard to focus on the games you already have. Plus, the more games you add to your collection, the more games you have fighting over your attention for which game you're going to choose to play. But this is where I am going to leave things to all of you. In particular, I want to hear about when you're choosing which games to play. What happens when things are going really well and it's really easy to choose which games to play? And what are some of those situations where you really have a tough time deciding and it's just miserable trying to pick out a game to play? So with that, leave your comments down below and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the Retro Bird.